Welcome to the Period Story Podcast, the podcast where we get behind some of the myths and misconceptions about periods. We chat with women about their period story, their first period, their journey ever since, and we open up a conversation to help break taboos and stigmas around menstruation. I'm your host, Lenise Brothers. I'm a yoga teacher and registered nutritionist specializing in women's health, hormones, and the menstrual cycle. I'm also the author of You Can Have a Better Period, the book Publishers Weekly calls an empowering debut, an informative, refreshing take on women's health. It's available from Amazon, Bookshop, and anywhere else you purchase books. I am so thrilled to share my conversation with Abby Epstein, the director of the fascinating and evocative documentary, The Business of Birth Control. Abby shares her own powerful and very personal story of self-discovery and change after coming off hormonal contraception. Please enjoy today's episode. Hi, Abby. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. I'm really excited to have you here and talk about all of the amazing work that you do, your films. But first, let's talk about the story of your first period.
I love this. I love that you focus on this. I think it's such a fantastic thing to think about and talk about. And so I had to kind of dig a little bit, to remember. And what I remember is it's kind of interesting because you know how in middle school, I don't know why, but everybody knew when everybody got their period. It was just that weird thing where you'd whisper in the halls, like Nicole got it last weekend and this one got it and that one got it. And generally it starts young, like people start at 10 years old or fifth grade. And I was just one of those people that never got it. And middle school came and went, and high school was starting, secondary school, and I still didn't have it. And so it sort of came down to this where I won't say her last name on the podcast, but it was me and this other girl, Sarah. And everybody knew that she and I hadn't had our periods yet. And then Sarah got hers. And it was just yes, you could tell she was so happy. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe this. And I think at the time I was just about almost 16 years old. And I also was dancing ballet a couple times a week. So people that can also, delay your period. I wasn't underweight, but I was dancing. And then my mom said, I want to take you to the gynecologist and just, whatever, make sure everything's okay. So we went to the gynecologist and, she basically kind of said something well, if it doesn't come and this time I might have to give you something to bring it on, some kind of medication. And that completely flipped me out. Right. So we left that. And then it was a few weeks before my 16th birthday. And we went on a family vacation to Hawaii. And I remember I met this boy and we had sort of a little, fooling around on the beach. I wasn't sexually active, but, it was that stage where you're kissing and you're just kind of feeling and, a lot of hand play. And then I came back from that vacation and I remember I woke up to go to school and there was a couple dots of blood on my underwear. And I was oh my God, I was so happy. And I remember thinking maybe it was that boy, maybe when I was with him, he touched something down there. I don't know. He broke something. I don't know. It's he broke my hymen. I didn't know, but I was he must have helped me in some way, or it was the pressure of thinking. It was so funny. And I remember, I'll never forget this. I wore a purple, straight, long skirt. I was obsessed with Prince and I wore lots of purple. And I had this purple, straight, long skirt and I had a big, bulky pad. And I was in school and I couldn't stop hinting to everyone, I couldn't stop saying oh, my pad is so uncomfortable. Oh, my underwear. Oh, is my pad sticking out? Can you see I I mean, I'm surprised I didn't like walk down the hallways with like the big bloody maxi pad in front of me, like, like a badge of honor, like stuck on my shirt. I mean, I have to tell you, it was like such a joy and such a relief. And also I was like, had been waiting for it for so long that I remember saying to my mom, like all casual, like, oh, Mom, do you have any pads? I just got my period. Yeah. Do you have any pads? And she tried to play it off also really like, oh, and I should mention that my younger sister is like 2.5 years younger than me. And of course had been having her period probably for a couple years at that point. So it was like double embarrassing, that my little sister is menstruating. But yes, that's the story.
So when you finally got it, did you know what to expect? Did you know what was going to happen beyond, okay, you're going to see this blood, you wear pads? Were you educated or had you educated yourself?
No, I really didn't know very much. I knew that my sister was having a pretty rough time. So my sister was having a lot of like, and she was an athlete, so it was hard. And I knew she was having like some very heavy cramping and like sometimes would like not go to school or come home from school. And they were trying like different pain relievers and things. So I knew about that. I remember the pads. I don't remember switching to tampons, but at some point I did. And I remember a friend or somebody telling me about, that you have to angle it. You don't just shoot it straight up. Angle. But I didn't know very much. And it's kind of funny, Lenice, because since I started, making my documentary and getting some more education around all of this, I kind of look back. And the interesting thing is, I think that I may have had some either, PCOS or some early PCOS, because like looking back on the symptoms and looking back on the sort of like delay in the period. And then I had some other things that line up, with PCOS actually, because I had, like very early, like, acne. Like I remember I had acne like all over my forehead when I was like 11 or, very young. I had acne on my chest. I remember in ballet, I had like some acne. And I remember when I went to the gynecologist that time, when I didn't get my period, I remember her saying something to me about testing my hormones, that she wanted to test my hormones because she thought I had some like excess hair. There were just like signs where she thought I might have. And so it's kind of interesting, looking back, I actually feel really lucky, because I think that I probably did have something going on like hormonally. And, I'm lucky that my period did finally come and that, things were not regular at all, because that's ultimately how I ended up on the pill. But it's, to me, it's like fascinating sort of how little I knew about periods, about my cycle, and, looking back now with all this knowledge and wondering, what might have been different had anyone put those pieces together.
And when you got your period and you were going around the halls at school in your purple skirt, and, I love that it was like a tribute to Prince. You mentioned the kind of whispers about periods and how everyone knew. How did you eventually tell your friends, and what was their reaction?
Oh, I couldn't wait. I mean, we're talking, pre-cell phone. So I would have had to wait until I got to school. But I remember telling my best friend, Nasimi, she and I also, this was like 2 years later, we were also like the last of the virgins. Like that was another thing, I remember I was still a virgin when I graduated high school. And again, you could count on one hand who were the girls. And it was like a similar kind of, accounting people do. But, oh yeah, I mean, it just went through the halls. Like I couldn't wait. I could told everybody, in subtle and not so subtle ways. And it was very, I felt very grown up in the complaining about it, I have to change my pad now. And, it was like, oh my God. And then I don't remember I don't remember those like last 2 years of high school tracking it or counting days or having any idea. I remember I must have, I think, had it from time to time, because I know that 2 years later when I went to university, it just completely stopped. So I knew. So I must have known that something was different. Like I must have known that it stopped. But I honestly have no idea, ladies, if I was having like a monthly period or I have absolutely no idea. I was never taught to track it or look at the days or.
And what was the point that you said you went on the pill? Was that when you lost it, when you went to university?
Exactly. Yeah. And that was really a very traumatic experience, because I remember when I went to university, I must have, it was sometime in my freshman, sophomore year, or maybe I didn't menstruate much my freshman year, but I remember it was like my sophomore year, when I really didn't have a period at all. And I think that, again, looking back, there are so many factors, right? I mean, one is, I don't know if there was some PCOS going on or there was some hormonal, I have no idea, was never told. I mean, I assume, I remember the gynecologist saying she wanted to test my hormones, and then I never heard anything. So I'm assuming that, I don't know, everything was okay. But when I did go back home for my annual exam, she was very keen to put me on the pill, but not only put me on the pill, she gave me 10 days or a week of hormones that I had to take to bring on a period so that I could then start the pill. And, it was unbelievably torturous because there was just no warning given about anything. And all I know is I start taking these pills and I'm thinking this is necessary, that because I have to menstruate, because this isn't good. And then, I'm sure she's thinking, well, this will be a double, protection for you, because then you'll be on the pill anyway, so you'll have contraception. But I wasn't even sexually active. And I just remember riding my bicycle to class at 8 a.m. and I would have to pull the bicycle over because I would just be sobbing and, sort of irrationally sobbing like a child, like I miss my mom, or just literally crying like a baby. And so I think many women do, I just thought there was some kind of depression, anxiety going on. I didn't connect it to these hormone pills that she had given me, to bring on menses. I was never warned. I didn't know. I didn't connect any of it. And then the pill she gave me when I did start it, and I did everything like a good girl and I was supposed to do, it was really awful for me. It was just awful. The side effects were awful. And I think I just stuck it out for a while, probably the whole semester, until I remember going home and going back to her. And I remember sitting in her office and just crying. I just started crying in the office because I felt terrible and I had gained weight and I was just feeling awful. And she was kind of, shocked. And she said, oh, there's everybody has such a different chemistry. And I really wish that these pills came in a more individualized way so that we could know, how different people's, hormones were going to react. But, it seems like this pill isn't a good fit for you. And let's try a different one. But it was so interesting because she was actually very compassionate, but I wouldn't have known, I never would have known when I was at school and suffering to call her or call my mom or say, something's happening. I think it's this pill. I just thought it was me. Like, I just thought it was having like a depressive year at school, or something. I just thought it was me. And so then we switched to a different pill. And that was more tolerable for me. And so I ended up, staying on that one for many years to come. But ended up having other problems on that pill, which again, I really didn't connect until I made this documentary.
How long in total were you on the pill?
I would say must have been like about 8 or 9 years, was like probably like 20 to 29.
Right. Okay.
Almost a decade.
Almost a decade. Okay. Mm-hmm. And what was the impetus for you to come off of the pill?
There was kind of this instinct that I had. I don't know how else to explain it. I was in a monogamous relationship and I was, I think 29, and I was thinking, I don't know, it was like an intuitive thing where I thought, I feel like I should like give my body a break from this. And I was thinking, I'm nearly 30 and I'm going to be thinking about children. I knew I wanted children. And I was like, I'm going to be thinking about maybe children in the next couple of years. And so I feel I should like, kind of clean house. And there's really, I don't know why I'm sort of on this anymore, but I think there was, at that point, I was like in such a steady state. And the things that had been happening to me that whole decade were chronic UTI and vaginal dryness, which I had no idea was in any way connected to that birth control pill. So those things that had been bothering me, with my sexual health, I didn't even think were connected to the pill. Like they were in no way an impetus to get off. I did, like struggle with acne when I was younger. So I did like that, it had kind of calmed all of that down and that my skin was clear. So I think like a lot of, young women, there was probably that fear of like making a change, because everything felt so like stable and my skin was stable. But it really, I think, that going off moment, I don't think I knew it at the time. I mean, I remember one of the first things when I went off is after like a couple months, I was like, oh my God, those were not my breasts. Like, I don't have, this like big C cup or whatever. And I was, I remember kind of laughing because I was thinking, oh my God, like, because I remember something about my wedding dress and I was thinking, I should have gone off before because my wedding dress would have fit so much better in the bust. Like I didn't. So I remember that was like kind of a dramatic thing. Like you forget. I thought those were my boobs. Those were not my boobs. Those were pill boobs. So, my boobs kind of went away. But I really liked that, like returning to myself. I really, really liked that coming back to myself. And a lot of things changed emotionally. And I had a big partner switch. I ended up leaving the partner that I was with at the time, which again, these are things I did not connect for, years and years and years. So, it's really crazy. Like it just, so many things, like when I was reading, Holly's book, Sweetening the Pill, I remember like reading all this studies about like partner attraction and this, and even the vaginal dryness, the UTIs. I mean, my God, I was like, there were so many things that I experienced that were so, textbook. And, and to this day, it's like, I do wonder, like, I really wonder if somebody had done the underlying work, right, to see why my period had stopped, for example. I don't know. I wonder what I could have uncovered about myself. I do wonder if the UTIs, like if I would have suffered with those, because those sort of never stopped, so there are things that I don't know that you just like wonder about, like how would your whole kind of sexual life, relational life, been different without that decade on the pill. I also was interesting because I did learn, other things about how, just what, turning off your own endogenous hormones, like how that can affect in some ways, even your own compassion, sensitivity. And I do look back on my 20s and certain periods, and I feel that I was not only sort of disconnected from myself, but very hard driving, very ambitious, and, sometimes even a little bit, I don't know, like kind of cutthroat, you know what I mean? Like behaving in ways that are really not me at all. Like I'm really not like that. Like I'm just incredibly empathetic, compassionate person. And so, a lot of things, like I really look back and just wonder, like, how much did this really affect, my personality, my attraction? I mean, it's fascinating.
It really is. You had a huge change after coming off the pill, emotional changes in your relationship. And then when you came off the pill, how long did it take for you to get your period back?
So that I don't remember. I remember very, very clearly that, my libido kind of roared back. And that's something that a lot of women have, described. But I remember it being just sort of shocking because I just thought I wasn't a very sexual person. I just thought, like, on the scale, I did have climax. I did experience orgasm. I did have quote unquote, good sex, but I didn't have a drive. Like I didn't have, it was, the only thing the last time I felt sort of libido that way was, maybe back in my senior year of high school before I started the pill. That was sort of what I could equate that real feelings of sex drive and libido. So that I remember that being like the most kind of shocking and like obvious difference. And also a huge relief, right? To think that maybe you're not such a sexual person and then you are. And then I know that my period came back pretty soon. I didn't have like a whole, I think it came back within the first like 2 months or, there wasn't an issue. And then I was I would say like, I did have, I remember, cramps. I had like period symptoms that I hadn't had like, back in high school. Maybe I didn't even have that many periods in high school, but because I didn't keep track. But, it was definitely, regular. And I remember having to kind of deal with the cramping. But it's very like, even today, it's funny because it's like, I still, have a very regular period. And when I did, so I think I went off the pill about 4 years before I got pregnant for the first time. And so once I was like back in my regular, cycling in my 30s, it was so easy for me. Like I would say like for 4 or 5 years, my partner and I, new partner, we didn't use any barrier methods. We didn't use any contraception. I did not know about fertility awareness, but my cycle was like so regular that I roughly knew like my fertile week. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But we were just able to time things in such a way. And then when we were like, yes, let's have a child, it was like first try, boom, first try, out the door, done. So
Wow.
I feel really lucky. And then my fertility journey was so easy, like so easy, getting my periods back after breastfeeding, second child, same thing, first try, boom, so I feel lucky, in some ways, but I don't know that, like, to me, that whole period, I think that whole decade when I was on the pill, although, I guess it's easy to look back, right? Everyone can look back and say, well, I'm very happy I had that. And because I didn't have to think about pregnancy, I understand that. I was a very monogamous person. So I wasn't a person who had one night stands or had like multiple partners. So I'm not really sure that, the sort of not worrying. I was never worried about getting pregnant. Like that was never a fear. I didn't have a fear like that, because I wasn't sexually active till I was 19. And then I was like mostly, with partners. So I didn't really have that fear, but I do look back and think like more about how that would have affected me emotionally and in terms of like partner choice. But I feel lucky that I didn't have problems like with my cycle after that, or any problems like with fertility.
It's really interesting that you said that you thought that you may have had PCOS. And then once you got your period back after you came off the pill, how it came back in a really regular way. You described it being like clockwork. And that's so fascinating, just thinking about it in the context of where you were when you started. You had a really late period. And also just thinking about that decade that you had on the pill. And I do sense a kind of regret there of what could have been. And do you feel like when you got your period back and you discovered who you really were, there was a kind of mourning that you had to go through?
Well, I think, the biggest thing more in terms of mourning was just the relationship stuff, because I think that is incredibly hard. Like when your like true sexual nature is awoken in that way, and you realize that you just don't have sexual chemistry with this wonderful person that you love in every way. And so, I think it was very traumatic. It was extremely traumatic and confusing. And I think that, it's like almost the way I could explain it is it's a little bit of like a Sleeping Beauty thing. So it's like waking up in your body, let's say, at 29 or 30, but kind of sexual, emotional intelligence, you're like 16. That's kind of what it felt like. Like it was like I couldn't sort of control it anymore, and it was sort of like I couldn't live in this lie in a sense. You know what I mean? Like I was basically in like a marriage that was platonic, and it was deep and there was full of love, but it was really platonic. And, there was sex, but it wasn't in any way the kind of sex that I come to know and experience later, So, I felt like, being disconnected from that piece of yourself. Right. And now understanding, like, I think how much libido is sort of diminished as sex drive, when that is not what libido is. Libido is your life force. It really is. And it really, so for me, I was only connected to a masculine life force. I was connected to a life force around work, around achieving. And that's what I was doing. I was winning awards and achieving, like at a very young age. And that was my life force. That's what was feeding me. And then suddenly to go off and sort of, I think I got almost like overwhelmed, right, by this whole world of like, real kind of sexuality and attraction that I had shut off. That's the only way I can explain it. It was sort of like, shut off. And every once in a while, I would get like a window into it and sort of a little wake up, but then it wouldn't really stick, or I would think, oh, maybe I'm missing something, but no. And so I think that's what's sort of confusing. It's like when you are not experiencing yourself, right? We know that your hormones interact with your environment to create yourself, right? I mean, if you read Dr. Sarah Hill's book, you can understand that they create the version of your brain that forms your personality. So I think, disconnecting from that, it's almost like I was living kind of a shadow life, and then when I sort of in my 30s got plugged into, myself, it just rocked everything, it just created huge upheaval. And again, I don't know that it was like I was making the best decisions either, because I think I was, again, like this 16-year-old, you know what I mean? Who's just been sort of handed the keys to the kingdom. And it's like, oh my God, this is what this is supposed to feel like. So then I think I was making more decisions just really based on passion, and attraction and sort of, because I had been, disconnected from it for so long. So it's so, I mean, I think that it's so fascinating to think about like how we, and again, honestly, Lise, like there was, that whole decade that I really like stayed on that pill, there really was no reason. Like I said, like I was in a monogamous relationship. I didn't have like a reproductive health issue that I knew about that I was like needing to be on the pill, like, heavy periods or endometriosis. Or there was no like medical reason. It's just this weird feeling of like, well, I don't know, things are good, and what if I went off and then this happened or, it's just interesting. I think sometimes how we just lock in to like thinking in some way that this is part of like being the good girl,
Yeah.
It's like you take the pills and, everybody's happy and you don't have to worry about that. But oh my God, I mean, looking back, it's just like, it's just like shocking what I didn't know.
What's interesting is that you mentioned the idea of being the good girl, and a few other guests that I've spoken to on the podcast have described this idea of being the good girl and as also linked to the rite of passage of going on the pill. So you turn 16 or 17, your friends are on the pill, it's your turn, you get your period. Now it's your turn to go on the pill. And I remember one guest describing it as kind of like, every girl in her high school was on the pill. And I just wonder about, I mean, I have lots of, questions about all of this, but in terms of your experience and then kind of linking into the film, the brilliant film that you made, The Business of Birth Control, was your experience kind of one of the drivers for you making this film?
I think it definitely was a driver, of course, because I feel, so the first film that Ricky Lake and I made together is called The Business of Being Born. So that is a really funny story because that film we started making because of Ricky's birth experiences. And then I got pregnant during the filming and ended up giving birth in the movie. So we both give birth in the movie, but hers is, like footage that she had kept. And mine is like live, following my birth in this movie. So I think, it's funny, right? Because The Business of Being Born, I didn't make that film because I had a passion for midwifery. Like I didn't even know what a midwife did, So I made that film because I was sort of fascinated as a feminist that I'd been so unexposed, and was kind of fascinated by Ricky's story. I didn't know I was going to become part of the story, right? So with the Business of Birth Control, when I read Holly Grigg-Spall's book, Sweetening the Pill, she had sent me the galley. The book hadn't been published. And I read it on the airplane when I was flying from New York to LA to meet with Ricky about another project we were doing. And I got off the plane and said, Ricky, oh my God, I just read this book and all these light bulbs went off. So many light bulbs went off. And some of it is, you get kind of so angry, right? About the mistreatment that you experience and the gaslighting that you experience. And so, that was also a real trigger for me. I'll just give you one quick example. I hope I'm not getting too graphic on your podcast. But I mentioned vaginal dryness, okay, for example. And so this can be a real side effect of hormonal birth control that people don't know about. So in my 20s, when I was, having sex with this long-term partner, we would use, lubricant or whatever, but still there would be this dryness. And so at one point I actually had an abrasion almost on the bottom of my vagina, almost at the perineum. It was just, it was literally rubbed, like a menopausal woman would get, And I remember I went to the gynecologist. She wasn't there that day. So I saw this man, one of her partners, and he looked at me and he said, that is herpes. And I said, excuse me. I said, actually, I've only had one partner, and we were both virgins when we met, and I've never slept with anyone else, and he's never slept with anyone else. It's actually not herpes. Could you tell me what's going on? Because it's, I get these when we have sex and I don't understand. He said, trust me, that is herpes. I'm going to run the test, but I'm so sure that, and he gave me these antiviral medications and literally told me I needed to start taking them that day. Can you imagine?
Oh my gosh.
And I'm so confused. And I'm whatever, 26, 27 years old. And I'm talking to my partner. I'm I don't understand. What? I'm are you doing something that you're not telling me? Whatever. He was no, this is crazy. I mean, I remember so embarrassed. I was in my hometown and I had to go to the pharmacy and fulfill these prescriptions for antiviral. Of course, within 2-3 days, they call. And of course, the test is negative. But the experience of it, he was so arrogant. He was so sure. And he did not believe me. He did not believe me. And he didn't want to look for any other reason. And I think that as a white woman of privilege, to experience that, and to be, it's so infuriating. It is honestly, it is so infuriating. It's so abusive. And so I think I was angry, and I was angry about my experience of going on that first pill that really wrecked an entire year of university for me. I mean, completely ruined it. I was a complete depressive, and it's just an all completely unnecessary, and such a lack of informed consent, such a lack of understanding. And so I think that I was, reading this book and connecting the dots in my own head, and then looking at what I experienced, let's say, within the reproductive health system, which is a 2 on the scale of 1 to 10 of what other women experienced. And I'm reading these stories. I was just my God, I said to Ricky, we've got to talk about this. We have to. This is going to be very unpopular. People are going to be very mad about that we're doing this. But I don't know. It's who's going to talk about this? Who's going to tell stories? I just felt we can have a liberal critique of hormonal birth control. Like we can be like liberal progressives and we can still critique this and find this gray space where we can talk about, health and safety. So, to me, I think it's all in a way, I think it's sometimes funny, Lenise, because people will say to me, oh, your films, like, do you have something against the medical system? And I'm like, my God, this has nothing to do with the medical system. That is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about how growing up with a uterus in the world means that you are funneled into this kind of reproductive health industrial complex that directly impacts so many aspects of your life. This is not just about, getting pregnant and having a cyst removed and going to the hospital to give birth. No, like these are decisions that impact, partner choice and sexuality and personality and depression. And, so it just really connected for me that it's like, I made this movie about childbirth. Women tend to wake up a bit when they're in that phase of trying to conceive and having children. And the reason I think that they wake up a bit is because there's something really powerful about pregnancy that rewires your brain. And I think that they wake up a bit and they're also thinking about, they're starting to think for two people, they're starting to think about, well, it's not just about, my health, it's about protecting this child's health. And that's easier, right? Like we hear that story all the time, right? Like with battered women, they don't leave the abuser until the abuser hits the child. Then they leave, right? Like, and that's basically, a lot of ways how women are built. So it's like, but when I thought about making this film and reading Holly's book, I was like, no. This has to start way before pregnancy. This has to start as soon as fertility, begins. Like this needs to start at, 9, 10 years old. The body literacy piece needs to start. And then there, this whole conversation around contraception, it's not medical. It's not medical. It's like there are so many spaces, I believe, where this is so much about a collective wisdom passed down from ancestors, knowing, this is about knowing that is like generational. And, I think that's why you see, we just had some news come out that 2021 was the highest rates of home birth in the United States in 30 years.
Wow.
Amazing statistic. Now, I know some of that was driven by the pandemic and people not wanting to birth in hospital. I get it. But it's more than that. It's that, women and people in general are discovering, right, that there are spaces that they've given over completely to the medical complex. Surrendered all power, all decision-making to doctors, professionals, and they're taking that back, and saying, no, this is the way I want to birth. And this is how I want my child to come in, or this is, and I think that it's so complicated around the contraceptive space in general, because it seems like everybody with a penis has been released from this conversation. It's like, there's just no accountability.
Yeah.
Right. And then there's this kind of, way that we've categorized unplanned pregnancies, which you see in religion and in the media and in movies and TV is like, the most catastrophic possible thing that can happen. And there's this huge fear around it. And that fear is what ultimately like controls people and motivates this sort of good girl. So yeah, I'm like such a long-winded answer, but I think I just really felt like, so motivated because not only of my personal experience, but really, I think just because of this collective, like waking up that needs to happen around this.
And what's have been the responses to the film? The film was recently released on Amazon UK. It's available to rent. So if you haven't seen it, please go and see it. It's a brilliant, brilliant film. But I'm curious, what have been some of the responses that you've seen?
Well, it's so interesting, Lenise, because the responses, I don't know, they're hard to categorize. I'll say some of the responses have been the same as like when we even announced we were doing the film, right? So we have, what I would call, I think there are like a lot of second wave feminists, and I would say, I would say feminists of like a certain generation, maybe Gen X and older, were very, very alarmed by the movie and, really feel that it's dangerous to talk about these stories. In the movie, we have some stories that are very difficult to hear about some families who lost their daughters from pulmonary embolisms, which is a rare side effect. We can say rare, but what's not rare are blood clots, which lead to the pulmonary embolisms. And so they really, I think whenever you start to talk about in any way, right, like women who were damaged by birth control, whether that's a stroke or an embolism, or in these cases, a death, you start to trigger all those like feminist second wave alarm bells, and so people were not, happy. And I think the response has been like consistent in that way. So I think that we've seen some like incredible reviews and articles of the movie, people that are just so passionate about it. And I think those are people like, just to give an example, Jamila Jamil, who's one of my favorite feminists and activists. She had us on her podcast and she just was blown away by the movie and completely got it. And as a feminist, completely got it. And then it was interesting because then her Twitter feed was attacked by, more conservative OBGYN people and people that were, mad that she was supporting the movie and felt so there's a bit of a war. I would say that when we were presenting the film, when you were there speaking on the panel in London, when Ricky and I were in Berlin and London a couple of weeks ago, I would say that a lot of that sort of like feminist, like infighting, I guess I would call it, I would say like that was largely absent. And I don't think that's because you aren't dealing with an abortion, ban in Europe and the UK. I think it's actually deeper. That would be a whole nother podcast. Yeah. I won't even begin, but I noticed that, for instance, in London, I feel like at that screening, it's like people are able to take in the film and then ask the real questions like, okay, so now what do we do? And does fertility awareness method work? But I have a friend who got pregnant on fertility awareness method. And so what do we use? And how, like really focusing on the concrete issue at hand, how do we kind of navigate this space where we don't have tons of options right now, right? Whereas I feel sometimes the response has been, here from in the US, from some of the liberal media, more of a backslap. You know what I mean? More of a little bit like put those girls in their place. Like you stay in your place and you're not being a good feminist. This is not a movie that anyone needs. And this is dangerous. And this is fear mongering. And I think Ricky was actually, that might have come up also on her BBC Woman's Hour interview, something about fear mongering, she said. And I think that word fear mongering is super interesting, right? Because if you're being accused of fear mongering, well, there must be something to fear. Like, what are you fear-mongering about? It's sort of like, it's interesting. And I feel that in the movie we were, conservative. Like, for instance, we don't talk about cancer. I mean, cancer connections, if you want to look at scientific evidence between the connection between taking hormonal contraceptives and certain cancers and certain autoimmune diseases, I mean, those stats are out there. Those studies are out there. Like, we don't even bring that up in the movie, right? And the reason we don't bring that up is because there's a lot of controversy around it in the medical industry and this study and that study. And so we didn't even touch that, people talk about whether these drugs can affect fertility, right, in later years. That's controversial to talk about. We don't touch that in the movie. I feel like, if we wanted to be fear mongering, if we wanted to, we really, I feel like, look at, I feel like the approach we take is historical. We look at history. We look at race. We look at body literacy. We look at, side effects. We look at, I don't know. To us, I feel like we did a good job. If you want to say this is a one-sided, movie, yeah, okay. You can say this is a one-sided movie. You could also say The Business of Being Born is quote unquote a one-sided movie. But our approach is like, we don't need to make a 90-minute movie that balances all the benefits of, hormonal contraception with the downsides, because I believe, we touch on that in the beginning of the movie and we acknowledge that, there's a deep connection with, women's liberation and the pill. But I feel like that is the mainstream narrative. Okay. Yeah. That is the mainstream narrative. And any, medical practitioner you go to is going to recommend the pill or the patch or the ID or hormonal contraception. They're going to push it. They're going to recommend it. They're not going to have a nuanced conversation with you about, do you prefer hormonal or non-hormonal? That is not happening.
Yeah. It's so fascinating, that word fear mongering and the idea that being more aware of what you're putting in your body and the side effects of what you're putting in your body could be considered fear mongering. And, you're exactly right when you say that the other side of the narrative has been told by doctors, by medical professionals who say, go on the pill, go on, take the Mirena, have the Mirena inserted. It's safe, it's fine. And to have a wider conversation where you are able to understand the side effects and, this whole idea of informed consent and body literacy is a really, really interesting one. I am really curious about what you have coming up next, because your films, I've seen The Business of Being Born, I've seen The Business of Birth Control, and both films, I know you have other films, but those films for me were really evocative and emotional. The Business of Being Born, I actually saw while I was pregnant with my son.
Oh.
Yeah, I think it was on Netflix or Amazon in the UK. So I watched it and it really opened my eyes to a lot of things. So what do you have coming up next?
Good question, Lee. I know. Well, right now, as you said, we are still, The Business of Birth Control just came out in April of this year in the States. And like you said, it was just released on Amazon in the UK. And so right now we're still kind of pretty deeply engaged in kind of getting that film distributed, because we aren't on any kind of a global streamer like a Netflix. So we are doing it like territory by territory, which is a lot of work. And so what we've just actually launched this week is we decided that because The Business of Being Born and The Business of Birth Control and our other films. So we have a 4-part series called More Business of Being Born, which is a follow-up to The Business of Being Born. And that kind of goes a little bit deeper into things. There's an episode on VBAC. There's an episode on Ina May Gaskin. There's an episode on just celebrity birth stories. things like that. And then we have a 9-part body literacy series called More Business of Birth Control that we launched. And that's more of like in a class kind of structure. So it's like video clips and links and articles, and again, meant to follow up the business of birth control for people who want a little bit more information. So I think that what we decided to do is say, okay, none of our work right now is available like on a Netflix or whatever. So we created our own like little mini streaming platform, and we're calling it the Business of Film Circle. And so basically what we're offering people right now is to go on, and instead of having like monthly, streaming dues, you just pay like a one-time fee, and then you have lifetime access to all of our films. And it's super affordable, and we're offering a 40% discount for birth workers and reproductive health professionals and sex educators and anybody in the field. So we've made it super accessible, and we're doing this promotion right now where if you join the Film Circle, you get to gift the Film Circle membership to a friend. So it's like a buy one, gift one. So that's what we just launched this week. And we're super excited because, we've gotten great response, and so many people have signed up. And so in addition to accessing all of our film content, you also we have a video archive of about 40 hours. That's different, classes and courses and recordings with different, hormonal health coaches. So you have access to that whole library. And then we do like a monthly Ask Me Anything series. So Ricky and I host a series where we bring different professionals on, like yourself. And we have kind of a big like meeting format where we, pick a topic and people come on and ask questions and get their questions answered for their reproductive health. So it's cool because it's kind of like joining like a mini film archive that you own for the rest of your life, but then you also are in part of this community as well. So that's what we're working on now, because we're learning that, it's one thing to make the content, and then the distribution of the content has almost become so complicated right now in this landscape. It's just very, crowded, as you know. And so we're doing that. And then, I don't know, we're looking at a couple projects. Everyone's pushing us to do the business of menopause because that is becoming...
I was going to say that. I was thinking, I wonder if they're going to do anything about HRT or menopause. And there was actually a really interesting article in New York Magazine about, the business of like midlife, which you should read if you haven't read already.
Oh, yeah. I know. I saw, was this the one in the Cut? It was in the Cut yesterday.
Yeah.
I saw it. I know, because I saw like Naomi Watts has launched a menopause brand and like all of these celebrities now. And I thought it was sort of interesting to think that, these women that are like my generation, the Gen Xers, are, looking at a different lifespan. Like everybody's looking to live into their 90s, right? And so it becomes more about how do you extend, right? Like, how do you extend this period of like middle age, I guess, how do you extend that as long as possible? I think it's fascinating. I don't know, like, it's interesting. I don't know how we'd approach it, Lenise, because I feel like, with childbirth and like with contraception, I feel that a lot of what we did in the film was kind of unveil either what I feel are, kind of not very transparent policies. Whereas with the menopause piece, it's different because it's more the opposite. It's more like nobody in the medical community has any answers and nobody's talking about it. So women have sort of taken it into their own hands to start their own companies. And I guess maybe because the medical community hasn't figured out how to profit off it yet in the same way, or maybe they're not as interested in controlling aging as they're interested in controlling fertility and procreation. I think they just care less about women past fertile age as a society, is my guess. But so I think we'd have to figure out, like Ricky and I have talked about it, like what's the way sort of in. And for us, it was sort of like also about the aging. Like we talked about doing a piece on aging, because Ricky's sort of always obsessed that like all of, these contemporaries or people she knows, they get like the same plastic surgery and everybody has like the same face. And, there seems to be this like idea about aging, or she let her hair go completely gray and got a lot of pushback for that, and so I think that would be also interesting to put together, right? Yeah. Like as part of aging and the menopause piece. I do think that there's a definite, like, it's not even like there's misinformation in the menopause space. Like there's just there's just zero information. Like people are just fumbling in the dark. Absolutely, and I was reading yesterday online, Nicole Jardim, who's one of the hormonal health coaches who's in our movie. She had a whole post on her Instagram about this because so many women in perimenopause and menopause are getting prescribed the pill.
Yeah.
It's what they're getting prescribed. And she was just saying something simple in her post, like, hey, I think it's actually a lot safer to do bioidentical hormones. If you're going to do hormones, don't do the pill. And anyway, she got like severe, like really attacked. And it started this whole confrontation with doctors. And I was shocked reading the comment thread to see that like some of the women said that they have to use the pill because it's covered by insurance, where the bioidenticals are not covered by insurance, so they can't afford them. And I was like, oh my God, that's fascinating. Like I never thought of that, but it's like now the pill has another way to make money. As being this kind of like cheap substitute for bioidentical hormone replacement. But anyway, it's a very interesting like comment thread on her website.
I mean, I feel like I could talk to you all day. You're so interesting. So you've shared a lot. You've shared your own story, very personal aspects of your own experience with the pill and coming off of it. And then, of course, there are all the brilliant films that you've made. For someone listening to this podcast today, what's the one thought that you would love to leave them with?
I guess I just love to leave everybody with this idea of, there is no kind of like one size fits all solution for any of this. And there's no shame and there's no judgment. And, you've just got to do your research and do what works for you. And, if that means that you are going to choose to be on hormonal birth control for a number of years because that is what works for your lifestyle, go do that. And there's no reason to feel, bad or worried, or there's no fear. Just research and understand and know that, simple things that, you might be depleting your body of certain minerals. You might want to take some supplements, and take care of yourself in certain ways. But, everybody has to make these decisions in the way that suits them and their lifestyle. And, I think that sometimes, I'm sure you're the same, Lenise, like we're in a bubble of a lot of women who are looking for, solutions outside of maybe mainstream, like medical advice, or they haven't liked what they've been told by their GPs. And, so they're looking for other solutions. And so they're open. And I just think that, everybody is on their own journey. And, the most important thing is just to advocate and research and do what's right for you. But I would also, encourage people that if you are in a medical setting and you are not feeling like you're being heard and you're not feeling like you're getting the answers that you need, don't give up. don't give up. Don't think like, well, I can't afford, a naturopath, or I can't do this, or I'm just a busy working mom. I don't have time to deal with this, because it doesn't take a lot. There are great resources out there. There's documentaries, there's podcasts, there's, wonderful books and practitioners like you, Lanice. And, you can get to the heart of things fairly quickly. And you'd be surprised at how many things, you can resolve. So I would say, be open and understand that there's a whole world of practitioners that has developed, whether it's in the world of hormonal coaching or naturopaths. And they're not out to go against medical advice. They're there to support and integrate and expand. So I know a lot of times for women, you can get very confused because you're feeling something and you tell your doctor, and your doctor says, well, I'm not going to test your hormones. That's a waste of time. We don't test hormones. And then you talk to a naturopath or somebody who says, well, you must get and it's very confusing. And there's a lot of conflicting evidence. So I think there's no wrong or right. There's no shame. There's no judgment. It's just take your time and be compassionate with yourself. But there's a lot of free information out there online, and there's a lot of great resources. So, just don't accept, being told well, there's nothing else you can do and you're stuck with this, because, that's hardly ever true.
I completely agree. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Where can people find you?
Oh, people can find me. Well, our film is on our social media is at Business of Birth Control. And then my personal handle is at Abby Epstein XOXO. And our website is thebusinessof.life, the business of life. Find me there.
All of those will be linked in the show notes. Thank you so much. It's been amazing having you on the show. I know that listeners will learn so much from what you've shared, and will learn so much from your film. So thank you again.
Thank you, Lanice. It's been such a pleasure.
For more inspiring conversations, head over to periodstorypod.com, where we have so many more for you to peruse. If you want help with your menstrual or hormone health, email me on hello@eatlovemove.com to set up a free 30-minute hormone health review. If you like today's show, please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Tag us, come say hi, and send in your requests for who you'd like to see on the show on Instagram and Twitter on @periodstorypod, or email us at hello@periodstorypod.com. I'm Lanice Brothers, and you've been listening to Period Story. Thank you so much for listening.